What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
Lake Overhalser was the kind of place that drew young people on sunny spring afternoons, especially in mid-April, when Oklahoma was finally beginning to shake off the last traces of winter. It was April 13th, 1986, a Sunday. The kind of day meant for sunbathing, gossiping with friends, maybe catching the attention of someone on a motorcycle. That's exactly where 19-year-old Pamela Tinsley found herself, lounging in the sun near the lake, surrounded by friends, trying to forget about the mess waiting for her back home. Pam, or Pammy to her friends and family, was radiant in her own quiet way. Her pale skin rarely tanned, and her features had earned her cruel nicknames from kids when she was younger. Some said she looked like an albino. But recently, she'd begun to embrace herself. She had just purchased her first bikini, and wearing it out in public was, for her, a sign of growing confidence. Her long, reddish-blonde hair, worn loose that day, caught the breeze off the lake. Pam looked like she belonged in that moment. Happy, relaxed, and maybe, in some small way, hopeful. Around 2 p.m., a man on a blue motorcycle pulled up near the group. No one knew him, but he didn't exactly give off dangerous vibes, not at first glance. Tall, tanned, in his 20s, the man wore jeans, a t-shirt, and sunglasses. He had brown hair and, according to some witnesses, a mustache. His bike, either a 650 cubic centimeters or 750 cubic centimeters Kawasaki, had what appeared to be out-of-state plates. He started chatting with the group. Something about him seemed to catch Pam's attention. Maybe it was the way he spoke to her or the way he smiled, confident but not threatening. Or maybe Pam just wanted a thrill. A brief escape. She leaned toward her friends and asked them to hold onto her purse, cigarettes, and shoes. Then, without much fanfare, she climbed onto the back of the stranger's motorcycle. As they started to pull away, someone heard her call out, half laughing, half serious, "You're going to bring me right back, right?" No one ever saw her again. When the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness rolled across Lake Overhalser, Pam's friends shrugged off her absence. They figured she'd linked up with the guy and was off having a spontaneous adventure. Maybe they'd laugh about it the next day. But when Pam failed to return to her small one-bedroom apartment in Edmond or show up for her job delivering the Oklahoma newspaper, concerns started to creep in. Her friends didn't report her missing. Her roommates didn't either. It was her boss who first raised the alarm, after Pam failed to report to work on Monday morning. Pam, always punctual and responsible, had never missed a shift without calling. Her employer contacted her parents, and that's when the reality of the situation hit home. Pamela was gone. Her parents wasted no time. They called the Oklahoma City Police Department, filed a missing person report, and began their own search. They drove to Lake Overhalser, passing out flyers with Pam's photo. They spoke to her friends and retraced her last known steps. Slowly, a story began to form, of a teenage girl overwhelmed by stress, surrounded by the wrong people, and perhaps more vulnerable than anyone realized. Pam's life in 1986 was complicated. She had moved into a small apartment in Edmond, Oklahoma, and opened her door to 3 roommates, 2 men and a woman. None of them had jobs. None paid rent. And Pam was starting to reach her breaking point. Friends say she wanted them gone. She confided in at least one person that she was scared of them. There was tension in the apartment, but it wasn't clear how serious it had become. The situation worsened when police showed up at her apartment 2 weeks before she disappeared and found marijuana growing in a closet. Pam insisted the drugs weren't hers. She was arrested and charged with cultivation, but later released. The case hung over her like a dark cloud. There were additional complications. Pam's fiancé was in the military, stationed out of state. Letters between the two were found, and in them, he repeatedly asked her to send him drugs, LSD, ecstasy. Whether Pam ever followed through is unknown, but the letters were real, and they added a layer of potential criminal exposure to her already strained situation. Despite all that, Pam was planning for the future. She still had hopes for her engagement. She wanted to clean house, literally and figuratively, and get back on track. Lake Overhalser on that spring afternoon was a break from all of it. It was a chance to be carefree, if only for a few hours. Pam's friends would later remember the strange things she had said in the weeks before she vanished. At least one recalled Pam stating that she didn't think she'd live long enough to have children. It wasn't said in a dramatic, attention-seeking way. It was almost offhand, fatalistic. Looking back, that memory stung. Her mother told investigators that it was out of character for Pam to ride off with a complete stranger. Leaving her purse, cigarettes, and shoes behind suggested she fully intended to come right back. She wasn't the type to run off with someone new, especially with a fiancé she adored. If she got on the back of that motorcycle, it was likely with someone she either knew or felt safe with. But no one knew who the man was. Police released a description to the media. They even circulated a composite sketch. But no one came forward. Not a single credible lead. It was as if the man and the motorcycle had vanished into thin air. Within weeks, police admitted what Pam's family already feared. She hadn't run off. She wasn't on some romantic road trip. She was most likely dead. The case was handed over to the Homicide Division. Lieutenant Bob Jones, who led the unit, was blunt with Pam's parents. He didn't believe she was still alive. With no evidence of foul play, no body, no blood, no crash, there was little to go on. But nothing in Pam's life suggested she'd vanish willingly. The focus shifted to finding the man she rode off with. There were theories. Some investigators believed the case was drug-related. Maybe Pam had threatened to go to the police about the marijuana. Maybe someone feared she'd turn them in. Others believed the motorcyclist could have been linked to the drug trade or her mysterious roommates. Then there were darker possibilities. What if she died accidentally of an overdose or in a crash, and whoever was with her had panicked, hiding her body? Without a crime scene, without a witness, the trail grew cold. By late summer of 1986, the investigation had stalled. Pam's family kept pushing, kept hoping, but the silence stretched on. In the years following her disappearance, Pam's case grew cold, but her name never faded from her family's hearts. Her photo remained pinned to bulletin boards, online databases, and inside binders of unsolved missing persons cases. But no arrests were made, no one came forward with verifiable information, and the man on the blue Kawasaki motorcycle was never identified. Investigators have long suspected that Pam's disappearance was the result of foul play, and every theory they explored led back to the same basic facts. Pam left with a man that day who was never seen again. Whether that man killed her intentionally or whether she died by accident and he panicked, investigators believe he holds the key to the truth. Without his identity, the case remains a heartbreaking mystery. Her case has all the hallmarks of a crime that should have been solvable. Witnesses saw her leave. They remembered the man, the motorcycle, and what he looked like. She left behind her belongings, her vehicle, and every indication that she had no intention of leaving for good. And yet, with no body and no suspect, Authorities could only speculate about what truly happened to her that afternoon. When the anonymous tipster called in 2008, it reignited brief hope that the mystery might finally be solved. But the caller never identified themselves. Despite tracing the calls to a restaurant, investigators couldn't connect the tip to solid evidence or to a known suspect. Without more information, the case slipped back into silence. One lingering theory still haunts investigators and Pam's family: that someone Pam knew orchestrated her disappearance, whether it was a roommate, someone connected to her fiancé's drug requests, or an acquaintance from her social circle. The idea that Pam may have flagged down the motorcyclist or spoken to him casually before getting on the bike led some to believe she wasn't just going off with a stranger. But no one ever admitted to recognizing the man. No one could or would provide a name. Pam's fiancé, stationed out of state, was devastated by her disappearance. He reportedly continued writing to her after she vanished, not initially realizing she was missing. Friends said he genuinely loved her, but his requests for drugs, whether Pam ever acted on them or not, cast a long shadow over her final days. Investigators briefly considered whether someone connected to her fiancé might have harmed her to prevent her from talking to authorities after the marijuana bust. But again, they found nothing concrete. Her parents, aging now, have publicly stated they just want closure. They've come to terms with the reality that their daughter is almost certainly deceased. But they still long for the truth, to know where she is, what happened, and who is responsible. As of today, Pamela Tinsley's disappearance remains one of Oklahoma City's most haunting unsolved cases. Over the years, cold case detectives have reviewed her file, hoping that new technology, DNA databases, or a change of heart might finally yield answers. Yet the case sits, a sad reminder of how quickly a life can vanish, how easily a killer can slip through the cracks, and how long families must wait in the shadows of not knowing. If she were alive today, Pamela would be in her 50s, but she is forever frozen in time, a smiling teenager in a missing persons flyer, remembered by her loved ones, and still waiting for justice. If you have any information regarding the 1986 disappearance of Pamela Tinsley, please contact the Oklahoma City Police Department or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In the early morning hours of February 2nd, 2016, 20-year-old Rose temporarily vanished without a trace from the care home where she lived in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. Her disappearance wasn't just puzzling. It raised urgent questions about vulnerability, oversight, and whether the young woman might have fallen victim to online grooming or an orchestrated abduction. Nearly a decade later, no concrete answers have surfaced, and the people who loved her are left grasping at threads, hoping one of them leads to the truth. Rose was described by those who knew her as sweet, imaginative, and sensitive. She had developmental challenges that made independent living difficult. Despite being 20 years old at the time of her disappearance, her mental and emotional maturity was closer to that of a young teenager. She had previously been in foster care, and at times in her youth, she ran away, usually returning a few hours later on her own. By 2016, Rose was living in a supportive care facility in Okmulgee, placed there due to ongoing mental health concerns. She had a history of becoming delusional when off her medications or when they required adjustment. Her care team and her father, John Timperley, were doing their best to keep her stable, safe, and cared for. Just days before she vanished, her doctor had made the decision to admit her to a psychiatric hospital once a bed became available. Rose, however, was not happy about the idea. She didn't like hospitals. This tension between her personal autonomy and her psychiatric needs may have contributed to what happened next. On the night of February 1st, 2016, everything at the facility seemed routine. Rose went to bed around 10 p.m., but throughout the night, she kept getting up, possibly agitated, unable to sleep, or anxious about the upcoming hospital transfer. The last confirmed sighting of her was at 2:30 a.m. on February 2nd by a member of the overnight staff. When they checked on her again around 4 a.m., they found her bedroom door locked, something that was not typical. A staff member managed to enter her room through the shared bathroom, only to find it empty. Her window was open. Outside, in the cold night air, Rose's belongings were scattered across the yard below the window. The facility staff immediately contacted police. Authorities responded quickly, and a search was launched in the surrounding areas. The care facility is located near residential and rural neighborhoods in Okmulgee, and Rose did not have access to a vehicle or known transportation. Searchers were immediately concerned for her safety. It was cold that night, and Rose had a known medical condition that required consistent medication. She didn't have her phone or money with her, and there was no indication of where she might have gone. There was also no evidence she had planned an escape, at least not on her own. However, that theory started to shift after investigators and family members recalled something Rose had mentioned just days prior. Before her disappearance, Rose had been overheard talking on the phone with someone she referred to as Uncle Charles. She told people that he was coming to pick her up to take her to a family funeral. But when police investigated the name, they discovered no one by that name existed in either her biological or step-family. Whoever Uncle Charles was, he may have been someone Rose met online, possibly someone who exploited her vulnerabilities and trust. The troubling reality that she may have been communicating with a stranger posing as family became one of the first major leads in the case. Her father, John Timperley, believed this may have been a case of grooming, a slow manipulation process where someone gains a victim's trust over time. Rose was known to be active on social media, including Facebook and YouTube. It's possible she met someone through these platforms who convinced her to escape. In the days following Rose's disappearance, the Okmulgee County Sheriff's Office received two potentially significant tips. February 11th, 2016, Gun Club Road sighting at 4:56 p.m., a delivery driver reported seeing a girl who resembled Rose walking westbound on Gun Club Road, near Oklahoma and Oakle Streets in Okmulgee. It was a brief sighting, and the girl was alone. Authorities followed up, but it did not lead to her discovery. February 14th, 2016, Locust Grove citing a much more detailed tip came 3 days later. A caller from Locust Grove told police that between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. on Sunday, he had seen a girl who looked like Rose at a local convenience store. She was with an older white-haired man, around 5 feet 6 inches, and they were traveling in a black four-door vehicle, possibly a Ford Focus. The man did not appear familiar to locals. The tipster overheard others discussing the missing girl and later recognized her from a missing persons photo. This sighting raised serious concerns that Rose may have been picked up by someone, perhaps Uncle Charles, and taken away voluntarily, though under manipulation or false pretenses. Unfortunately, this lead, like the others, did not yield any further results. On February 15th, 2017, a year after Rose went missing, a partial torso was discovered in Okmulgee. The remains were in a state of advanced decomposition, and given the location, her father John feared the worst. He rushed to the scene, praying for clarity, and at the same time, dreading the possibility that his daughter's remains had been found. Days later, police confirmed the remains belonged to a missing woman from Colorado. It wasn't Rose. A moment of relief for the family, but also devastation because they were back at square one. In a televised interview, John was raw and vulnerable, expressing that though he didn't want it to be Rose, at least an identification would have brought answers. Closure. After years of investigation, two major theories have emerged. 1. She was groomed and taken by someone she met online. Rose was active online and possibly chatting with men she didn't really know. There's some acknowledgement, for the first time, that she had been having inappropriate conversations with adult men on social media. It's possible one of these individuals convinced her to escape and promised to rescue her from the care facility and the looming hospital stay. The sighting of her with an older man in a black car supports this idea. 2. She became delusional and left on foot, later picked up without her medication. Rose could become delusional or confused. Her father speculates that she may have left the facility in a compromised mental state and was then picked up by a stranger on the road. She had no money or ID. If someone picked her up and took her out of state, her trail may have quickly gone cold. In both scenarios, one thing is clear. Someone likely helped her leave. She couldn't have gone far on her own. One of the most heartbreaking elements of Rose's case is the fact that, legally, she fell through the cracks. At 20 years old, Rose was too old for an Amber Alert, which typically applies to minors under 18. However, she was also too young for Silver Alert, which is designed for missing elderly adults, often with dementia. Despite her developmental disabilities and dependency on structure care, there was no existing alert system that could be triggered in her case. That meant less media coverage, slower public awareness, and fewer resources deployed. Her father has since advocated for reform, urging other parents of vulnerable young adults to seek guardianship or power of attorney, not out of control, but out of protection in cases like this. A Facebook page, Let's Find Rose, continues to update the public with new information and awareness campaigns. Her father has kept the fight alive, organizing vigils and awareness events. One vigil was held in February 2023, 7 years after her disappearance. There's also a GoFundMe campaign started to raise money for hiring a private investigator and public relations firm to push the story into national spotlight, something her father believes may be necessary, especially if police have deprioritized the case. John believes Rose is still out there. He hasn't given up hope, and neither have the people who loved her. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to Rose Timperley. Whether she left of her own free will or was taken advantage of in a moment of vulnerability, she has not been seen or heard from since February 2nd, 2016. Rose is described as a white female, 5 feet 3 inches tall, weighing about 110 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white t-shirt and green pajama pants. She may be using the alias Rose Nettle. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Rose Timperley, please contact the Okmulgee Police Department or the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. On January 17, 1998, 51-year-old Peggy Sweden vanished from her home in Grove, Oklahoma. A devoted special education teacher and a beloved mother, Peggy's disappearance left behind far more questions than answers. Her husband, James Lee Jim Sweden, offered a bizarre and troubling explanation. According to him, he returned home from a work-related trip to find Peggy gone, her wedding rings and a handwritten note left behind. The note, he claimed, stated she had met another man online and was leaving her marriage to be with him. James told this to friends, family, and eventually law enforcement. But there was a problem. Peggy wasn't the kind of woman who would vanish without a trace, especially not like this. She had left behind all of her personal belongings, her car, her clothes, her ID. Even her purse remained untouched. Most significantly, Peggy had left behind the people who loved her most, especially her son, Patrick Sweden. And Patrick immediately felt something wasn't right. Patrick had last spoken to his mother in December 1997, but he wouldn't learn she was missing until March of the following year, nearly 2 full months after her supposed disappearance. His father had waited that long to tell him. Even then, it took until June 1998, 5 months after Peggy vanished, before James finally filed an official missing persons report. Why the delay? By that time, the alleged goodbye note had mysteriously disappeared. There was no longer any evidence that Peggy had written one at all. Patrick was stunned. He knew his mother well. She wasn't tech-savvy. In fact, she didn't even have an email address. The idea that she had met someone online was not just unlikely, it was, in his words, impossible. But there were more red flags. James filed for divorce just 3 weeks after Peggy went missing on February 9, 1998. The divorce was finalized in early April. Within months, James had moved on completely. That June, he moved in with another woman. By December, they were married. As investigators would later discover, this relationship wasn't new. James had been having an affair with this woman well before Peggy's disappearance, as early as fall 1997, according to the woman's ex-husband. She divorced her own spouse just 5 days before James divorced Peggy. Patrick was horrified. His mother's case hadn't even been reported when James was already divorcing her, moving in with someone else, and starting a new life. When Patrick asked his father why he had rushed the divorce, James told him he had received a phone call from Peggy saying she wasn't coming back. But later, James's divorce attorney contradicted that story, telling police that James's main concern during the divorce process was ensuring the couple's property would be in his name. This behavior alarmed investigators, and over time, the case grew cold until 2011 when things began to heat up again. In 2011, Patrick gave an interview with the Delaware County District Attorney's Office. He said that shortly after his mother vanished, his father had built a shed in the backyard. When Patrick asked about it, James said he needed a distraction to cope with the loss of his wife. But Patrick always felt the timing was suspicious. Investigators conducted a new interview with James in June 2011. He declined to take a polygraph test and refused to allow a non-invasive search of his property. He told them he didn't trust polygraphs and had seen too many innocent people sent to jail because of them. Detectives weren't convinced by this explanation. They obtained a search warrant and began excavating the area around the backyard shed. Ground-penetrating radar had identified an anomaly underneath, which raised suspicions. After a 2-day search, the anomaly turned out to be a tree root, not human remains. Disappointed, authorities had no choice but to let the case go cold again. But District Attorney Eddie Wyant vowed to keep investigating. He publicly named James Sweden as a person of interest in his wife's presumed death. Peggy's son Patrick, meanwhile, never gave up hope of finding answers. Then, in 2023, a potential breakthrough came. During another search of the area around Grand Lake, not far from Peggy's former home, investigators found a 55-gallon barrel submerged in 15 feet of water. Patrick told them it resembled a burn barrel that had gone missing from their property around the time his mother disappeared. James had never provided an explanation for what happened to it. Excitement briefly grew that this could be the long-awaited discovery of Peggy's remains. But hopes were quickly tempered when the barrel was opened and no human remains were found inside. Still, the timing of what happened next raised eyebrows. 2 days after the barrel's discovery was reported in the news, James Sweden called the police. He told them he planned to take his own life. Officers rushed to his home in West Laco, Texas, where James had lived for years with his second wife. But they were too late. James was found in a shed on his property, the same place he had once told his son he built for distraction, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 79 years old. Was this the act of a man haunted by his past, or simply a coincidence? Investigators examined James's phone and computer in the days following his death. What they found was chilling. In the 3 days leading up to his suicide, James had repeatedly searched online for news articles about Peggy's case. He also sent his wife detailed texts outlining their financial situation, including which credit cards paid which bills, a clear sign he had planned his suicide. But perhaps most revealing was a journal-like document saved on his phone titled 14 Years Ago. It appeared to recount his version of Peggy's disappearance, but it didn't match the version he had told police. Key details were different. Inconsistencies raised even more suspicion. James Sweden never confessed to any crime. But in the absence of clear evidence, and with his death, the investigation hit another wall. Peggy wasn't just a missing person. She was a deeply loved mother, teacher, and friend. At the time of her disappearance, she stood between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 6 inches, weighed around 145 pounds, had black hair, brown eyes, and wore glasses. Her life revolved around helping children with special needs and supporting her family. If she were alive today, she would be in her late 70s. But after all these years, no trace of her has ever been found. To this day, the mystery of Peggy Sweden's disappearance remains officially unsolved. But her son, Patrick, and many others believe the answer has always been close to home. Did James Sweden orchestrate his wife's disappearance to make room for a new life? Was Peggy the victim of a tragic betrayal by someone she trusted most? Or did something else entirely happen behind closed doors? With James's passing, some answers may have gone to the grave with him, but authorities remain committed to pursuing any new leads. And Patrick continues to hope that one day, the truth will come out for his mother. It was a summer evening in 1978 when 13-year-old Cheryl Taylor walked across the street in the small mining town of Pitcher, Oklahoma, on a simple errand. She was supposed to stop a local grocery store and return home, but somewhere between her front door and the store entrance, Cheryl vanished. No one saw her go inside. No one saw where she went, and no one ever saw her again. More than 45 years later, her disappearance remains one of the oldest and most disturbing cold cases in Oklahoma, a case of a restless teenager, a town with dark secrets, and a killer who may have been hiding in plain sight. Cheryl wasn't from Pitcher originally. Her family had just moved there from Nowata County, a rural area about 50 miles away. The Taylors weren't wealthy, and like many families of the era, they moved frequently. Cheryl had been struggling in school and at home. Teachers described her as a hot-tempered, independent girl who needed guidance. By the time they arrived in Pitcher, she was unhappy. She didn't like the town, didn't like the change, and made it clear to her friends she wanted to leave. And if you know anything about Pitcher, Oklahoma, back then, it wasn't exactly a safe haven. Pitcher was once a booming lead and zinc mining town. But by the 1970s, the mines had closed, and what was left behind was a shell of a city. Entire blocks were condemned due to toxic waste and land subsidence. Abandoned homes, chain-link fences, warning signs about contaminated soil and sinkholes. It looked more like a post-apocalyptic wasteland than a place to raise a child. And it was right in front of one of those fenced-in, condemned zones where Cheryl Taylor was last seen. It was Thursday, July 20th, 1978. Sometime between 7:15 and 7:30 p.m., Cheryl's mother sent her on a quick errand across the street, to a small local grocery store in the center of town. It was a route Cheryl had walked many times before, no more than a block or two. She was last seen standing in front of the gate to a fenced-off 4-block area, an old part of town that had been deemed unsafe and uninhabitable since the 1950s. And that was it. There were no screams, no reported struggles, no sightings. No one remembers seeing her go inside the store. No one saw her come back. She simply disappeared. What happened next was strange. Instead of staying in Pitcher to search, Cheryl's family moved away just days later. They had only recently arrived, and now they were gone again. It raised eyebrows even then. Authorities initially did not treat the case as a likely abduction. Instead, they leaned toward the assumption that Cheryl had run away. Why? She had reportedly talked to friends about running off with a local man, described only as a junk dealer, a vague title that could mean anything from a scrapper to a dangerous drifter. It was a red flag, but in the 1970s, when a teenager disappeared, the go-to assumption was always she'll come back. One of the earliest theories was that Cheryl had left to stay with her older sister, who lived in Galena, Kansas, just across the state line. The problem? Cheryl's sister was on a trip when Cheryl vanished, and when authorities finally tracked her down, she and her husband both denied any contact. There were no calls, no notes, no signs Cheryl had tried to reach her. This theory died quickly, but it would take years before the case was looked at with fresh eyes. Decades after Cheryl vanished, investigators revisited her file and found a chilling connection. Carl Lee Myers was a known predator in Oklahoma with a criminal record dating back to 1965. He had a history of attacking young girls, and in 1978, the same year Cheryl vanished, he was charged with murder. The victim? Ellen Deanne Roden, another teenage girl who had disappeared the year before. Her skeletal remains were found in 1978, tied into a tree. She had been brutally beaten to death. The location wasn't far from where Cheryl had last been seen. Though Myers was acquitted in Ellen's case, he was later convicted of 2 other murders and sentenced to death. He died in prison in 2012, never confessing to involvement in Cheryl's case. Still, many believe he may have been responsible. The timing, the profile, the location, all fit. But here's the chilling truth. Cheryl's disappearance wasn't treated like a crime. No Amber Alerts existed back then. No national databases. And the idea that a 13-year-old girl could just vanish forever was met with shoulder shrugs and unanswered questions. The junk dealer she may have talked about, never identified. No search warrants. No interviews. No follow-up. For years, decades, her case file sat idle. No DNA. No social security tracking. No media attention. Just another forgotten girl in a forgotten town. There are three main theories. 1. She ran away, yes. She talked about leaving. Yes, she disliked Pitcher. But it's unlikely a 13-year-old could vanish without ever resurfacing. No job, no ID, no contact with anyone from her past for over 45 years. 2. She was abducted possibly by the unnamed man she spoke of, or someone she trusted. Maybe even a stranger. Given the proximity of her last sighting to a deserted part of town, someone could have easily taken her without being seen. 3. She was murdered by Carl Myers? By the junk dealer? By someone else entirely? If so, her body may still lie hidden somewhere in one of Pitcher's hundreds of abandoned homes, mines, or sinkholes, places too dangerous and unstable for police to search. Cheryl's family, fractured by the years and the mystery, has never found closure. Her mother passed away without answers. Her case has never been officially closed, but remains cold, ice cold. There are no confirmed sightings, no recent leads. Just a fading photo of a girl in the 7th grade. And a single decision that changed everything. A short walk across the street that led into complete oblivion. If you lived in Pitcher, Oklahoma in 1978, if you knew someone who did, if you recall a man known as a junk dealer, or heard rumors of a girl gone missing or stories about Carl Myers, now is the time to come forward. Even one memory, one clue, one offhand comment could finally bring answers to a mystery that's been buried as long as Pitcher itself. Cheryl Taylor was just 13 years old. She had dreams, frustrations, fights with her mom, crushes, secrets. She deserved to be found. She still does. If you know anything, contact the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. When 15-year-old Patricia Lynn Taylor walked out of her part-time job at a Sonic drive-in in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the warm summer evening of August 31st, 1981, no one realized it would be the last time anyone saw her. Patty told a co-worker she was getting on a bus. She didn't say where she was going or why. But since she had run away before and always returned, no alarms were raised. But this time, she didn't come back. No note, no suitcase, no money, no goodbye. Patricia Lynn Taylor, known as Patty, was born in California in 1966. Her early years weren't easy. She was raised in an environment marked by instability and hardship, and sometime during her childhood, she was sent to live with relatives in Grand Forks, North Dakota. That arrangement didn't last long. Just 6 months later, she was moved again, this time across the country to Oklahoma, where she was placed under the care of the state's Department of Human Services. She was only a teenager, but she'd already lived a life full of transitions, instability, and displacement. Patty was first sent to the Oklahoma Baptist Home for Children's Owasso campus, a residential facility for at-risk youth. Then in July 1981, she was transferred to the Tulsa Girls Group Home, a small, state-run facility housing just 6 to 8 girls. It was there she spent the last weeks of her known life. By all accounts, Patty was a bright and beautiful young girl. With her striking red hair, deep green eyes, and slender frame, she stood 5 feet 7 inches and weighed just 110 pounds. She had a presence that people remembered. She loved music, dancing, reading, and was especially fond of sewing. Friends and relatives described her as sharp, clever, and funny, but also sensitive, rebellious, and often misunderstood. She clashed with authority, frequently ran away, and struggled to adjust to life in institutional care. Her time at the group home was reportedly difficult. She hated school, didn't like the rigid rules of the facility, and longed for something else, though no one knew exactly what that was. It was August 31st, 1981. Patty had a shift at the Sonic Drive-In just a block away from the group home. At the end of her shift, she turned to a co-worker and casually said she was getting on a bus. She left with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her suitcase and belongings were still at the group home. No one at the home reported her missing that night. In fact, no one reported her missing at all. Because she had run away before, staff assumed she'd be back. But this time, she wasn't. Incredibly, no official missing persons report was ever filed by the group home or DHS. For the state, Patty was just another runaway, one of many teenagers who slipped through the cracks. When Patty turned 18, her case was automatically closed as per DHS policy. She had no known social security number, no forwarding address, no bank account. She simply vanished. And for 30 years, no one in any official capacity tried to find her. The silence broke in 2011. That's when Patty's half-sister, April Vrooman, began to ask questions. She had grown up wondering about the sister she never really knew, the red-haired girl lost before she had the chance to grow up. April dug through public records, tracked down former DHS workers, and spoke with staff from the old group home. She uncovered no missing persons report, no police file, no follow-up from the state. Nothing. In 2015, April convinced authorities to finally open a missing persons case for her sister. That same year, April submitted her DNA to CODIS, the National DNA Database, hoping that somewhere, maybe in a Jane Doe file or old evidence locker, Patty's identity might be confirmed. But so far, no matches. As April searched, she began piecing together fragments of a puzzle long neglected. During one of her earlier runaway episodes, Patty had reportedly gotten a tattoo of the letter S on her upper right arm. No one knows what it stood for. A person's name? A nickname? A symbol? Patty had once written a letter to her grandparents, an affectionate note, signed Love, Patty, and Dawn. But who was Dawn? The name had never come up before. Was it a friend, a boyfriend, or something else entirely? Years later, April learned about a man named James Lay, a figure with a criminal background and alleged connections to the adult entertainment industry in Tulsa during the 1980s. Even more chilling, James Lay had a brother named Don. According to one tip, James had allegedly bragged that Patty had disappeared from an adult club. Was it an exaggeration, a boast, or something far more sinister? 1. Patty ran away, and stayed gone. Some believe Patty simply walked away from her life. She had run away before. Maybe she made it out of Tulsa, found a new identity, and never looked back. But if that's true, why hasn't she reached out? Why not even once in over 40 years? 2. Patty was a victim of exploitation. Others suspect that Patty may have fallen into the hands of someone dangerous. A 15-year-old girl with no support, no money, and no supervision is especially vulnerable to trafficking. Could she have been manipulated, sold, or even killed? 3. A cover-up or negligence, perhaps the most painful theory. What if someone at the group home or Sonic knew more than they admitted? Why did no one report her missing? Was her disappearance deliberately swept under the rug? Patty would be 57 years old today. She might be alive, living under another name, not knowing her family still searches for her. Or maybe she never made it far from that bus stop in 1981. April continues to search. She's found Patty's dental records, submitted DNA, and followed every faint lead. She runs a Facebook page called Searching for Patricia Lynn Taylor, where she posts updates, old photos, and additional information, but after all these years, she's still waiting for answers.